The real story behind Smells Like Teen Spirit. When Kurt Cobain stumbled into his Capitol Hill apartment at 3 a.m. on July 23, 1990, after a wild night of partying with friends from the riot girl band Bikini, he was drunk, exhausted, and completely unaware that he was about to discover the inspiration for what would become the most important rock song of the 1990s. What he found scrawled across his bedroom wall in black Sharpie marker would change not only his life, but the entire course of popular music. The graffiti consisted of just 4 words, written in the distinctive handwriting of Kathleen Hanna: "Bikini kills, fierce lead singer, Kurt smells like teen spirit." To Kurt in his intoxicated state, these words seemed like profound punk rock poetry, a perfect encapsulation of youthful rebellion and anti-establishment attitude. What he didn't realize was that Kathleen had actually written something far more mundane and embarrassing than he could have imagined. But the most shocking part of this story isn't what Kathleen wrote on Kurt's wall that night. It's what those 4 words actually meant, and how a simple misunderstanding about feminine hygiene products would accidentally create the anthem that defined an entire generation and launched the grunge movement into global phenomenon status. The truth behind Smells Like Teen Spirit reveals how sometimes the most profound cultural moments arise from the most ridiculous misunderstandings, and what Kurt eventually learned about the real meaning of Kathleen's graffiti would embarrass him so much that he considered never playing the song again. The summer of 1990 was a pivotal time for both Kurt Cobain and the emerging underground music scene in Olympia, Washington. Nirvana had released Bleach the previous year to modest success, but Kurt was struggling creatively and personally, unsure of the band's direction and battling depression and addiction issues. Kurt was in a really weird place during the summer of 1990, recalled Chris Novoselic years later. He was drinking heavily, staying up all night, and constantly questioning whether Nirvana was going anywhere. He felt like we were just another underground band that would never break through. At the same time, the Riot Girl movement was gaining momentum in Olympia, led by bands like Bikini Kill, Bratmobile, and Heavens to Betsy. These feminist punk groups were rearing a new form of aggressive political music that challenged both mainstream society and the male-dominated punk scene. Kurt had become fascinated with the Riot Girl movement, particularly with Bikini Kill's charismatic frontwoman Kathleen Hanna. Her confrontational stage presence and unapologetic feminist message represented everything Kurt wished he had expressed through his own music. Kurt was completely intimidated by Kathleen, remembered mutual friend Slim Moon, who founded the Kill Rock Cause record label. She was this fierce, articulate, politically minded artist who seemed to have all the answers that Kurt was searching for. He looked up to her in a way that was almost like hero worship. The night of July 23rd had begun at a house party in Olympia, where several members of Nirvana and Bikini Kill had gathered along with other musicians and artists from the Pacific Northwest scene. The party was one of those legendary gatherings that would later be remembered as defining moments of the early 90s alternative music movement. "That party was incredible," recalled Toby Vale, Bikini Kill's drummer, who was also Kurt's on-and-off girlfriend at the time. "Everyone was there, people from all the bands, writers from fanzines, artists, activists. There was this sense that we were all part of something important that was happening." Kurt had been drinking steadily throughout the evening, and by midnight he was in what friends described as a philosophical mood, engaging in deep conversations about art, politics, and the future of punk. He was particularly drawn to discussions with Kathleen Hanna, whose sharp wit and radical perspectives both excited and intimidated him. Kurt would get really intense when he was drinking, Toby observed. He would want to talk about big ideas, the meaning of art, the state of society, what music could accomplish. Kathleen was one of the few people who could match his intensity and challenge his ideas. As the party began to wind down around 2 a.m., a small group, including Kurt, Kathleen, Toby, and a few others, decided to continue the celebration at Kurt's apartment in Capitol Hill. The group poked through the quiet Seattle streets, continuing their animated discussions about music and politics. "Walking back to Kurt's place that night felt really magical," Kathleen recalled years later. "We were all young and idealistic and felt like we were going to change the world through our music. There was this incredible sense of possibility in the air. When they arrived at Kurt's apartment, the group settled into his living room, where the conversation continued over cheap beer and cigarettes. Kurt's apartment was typical for a struggling musician, sparsely furnished, with musical equipment scattered around and band posters covering the walls. Kurt's place was pretty bare bones, remembered Dave Grohl, who wasn't present that night but had visited the apartment many times. He had a mattress on the floor, some amps, a few guitars, and not much else, but it had this creative energy. You could feel that important music was being made there. As the night progressed, the conversation became increasingly abstract and philosophical. Kurt and Kathleen engaged in a particularly intense discussion about the nature of authenticity in punk music and whether it was possible to maintain artistic integrity while reaching a larger audience. Kurt was obsessing about selling out before Nirvana had even really sold anything. Kathleen reflected. He was already worried about what would happen if the band became successful. He had this idea that success automatically meant compromising your values. Around 3 a.m., most of the group decided to call it a night and began making plans to leave. However, Kathleen, who had been drinking as much as anyone else, announced that she was too intoxicated to make it back to Olympia and asked if she could crash at Kurt's place. Kathleen was pretty wasted, Toby remembered. We all were, but she was really in no condition to drive or even find her way home. Kurt offered to let her sleep on his couch, which was typical of his generosity. As the others departed, Kurt retreated to his bedroom, while Kathleen settled onto the living room couch. Both were exhausted from the long night of partying and philosophical discussion, and the apartment quickly became quiet. But Kathleen wasn't quite ready to sleep. Still energized from the evening's conversations and feeling mischievous from the alcohol, she began exploring Kurt's apartment, looking at his record collection and examining the various verses of musical equipment scattered around. I was being nosy, Kathleen admitted years later. I wanted to understand Kurt's creative process, see what inspired him. His apartment was like a window into his artistic mind. During her exploration, Kathleen discovered a black Sharpie marker on Kurt's coffee table. In her intoxicated state, she was struck by a sudden impulse to leave a message for Kurt, something that would capture the spirit of their evening together and the connection she felt at the underground music scene. I wanted to write something that would make Kurt laugh when he woke up, Kathleen explained. Something that would remind him of our conversation and the energy we were all feeling about the music we were making. Kathleen made her way to Kurt's bedroom, where she could hear him snoring softly. The wall next to his bed was blank white paint, a perfect canvas for her spontaneous artistic expression. Using the black Sharpie, Kathleen carefully wrote 4 words in large letters across the wall. Kurt smells like teen spirit. To Kathleen, who was friends with Toby and knew about her relationship with Kurt, this message had a very specific and somewhat embarrassing meaning. Teen Spirit was a popular deodorant marketed specifically to teenage girls, and Toby had recently mentioned that Kurt reminded her of the product's scent. It was an inside joke, Kathleen later revealed. Toby had been saying that Kurt smelled like Teen Spirit deodorant because he was always hanging around teenage girls in the scene. It was meant to be funny and a little bit teasing, but in her drunken state, Kathleen wrote the message in a way that was ambiguous. It could be interpreted as an insult, a compliment, or simply an abstract statement. She had no idea that Kurt would interpret her graffiti as something profound and meaningful. After writing the message, Kathleen returned to the couch and fell asleep, completely unaware that she had just provided the inspiration for one of the most iconic song titles in rock history. Kurt woke up around noon the following day, with a massive hangover, and only fragmented memories of the previous night's events. As he sat up in bed and rubbed his eyes, he immediately noticed the black writing on his wall. Kurt smells like teen spirit. In his hungover and confused state, Kurt stared at the words for several minutes, trying to process their meaning. To him, they seemed like a perfect punk rock statement, mysterious, rebellious, and somehow censuring the essence of youth culture and alternative music. When I first saw those words on my wall, I thought they were the coolest thing I'd ever read, Kurt later told friends. They seemed to sum up everything I was trying to express through my music. This sense of youthful rebellion and anti-establishment attitude. Kurt had no idea that Teen Spirit was a deodorant brand. In his mind, the phrase Teen Spirit represented the essence of adolescent angst and rebellion, the very emotions he had been trying to cache in his songwriting but had never been able to articulate clearly. Kurt thought Teen Spirit was like the spirit of teenagers. Their energy, their anger, their desire to rebel against authority, explained Chris Novoselic. He had no clue it was a consumer product. To him, it was pure poetry. Energized by this apparent burst of creative inspiration, Kurt immediately picked up his guitar and began experimenting with chord progressions and melodies that might match the attitude of Kathleen's graffiti message. Kurt was really excited about those words, remembered Dave Grohl. He kept talking about how they perfectly captured what our generation was feeling. He started working on music to go with them right away. The chord progression that would become Smells Like Teen Spirit came to Kurt almost immediately. The simple but powerful combination of FBABD created exactly the kind of anthemic, explosive sound that seemed to match the rebellious energy he perceived in Kathleen's message. The music just flowed out of him, Chris recalled. Kurt had been struggling creatively for months, but suddenly he had this burst of inspiration. He knew he was onto something special. Kurt spent the rest of that day and the following week developing the song, crafting lyrics that he believed captured the spirit of teenage rebellion and alienation. He drew inspiration from his own experiences of feeling like an outsider, as well as his observations of youth culture and the underground music scene. Load up on guns. Bring your friends. It's fun to lose and to pretend, Kurt wrote, creating lyrics that were intentionally abstract and open to interpretation, much like Kathleen's original graffiti message. The song's chorus, built around the phrase "smells like teen spirit," became an explosive release of energy that seemed to encapsulate all the frustration and rebellion that Kurt and his generation were feeling. "Here we are now, entertain us," Kurt sang, creating what would become one of the most recognizable hooks in rock history, while having no idea that he was essentially singing about deodorant. When Nirvana first performed "Smells Like Teen Spirit" at a small club in Seattle a few weeks later, the reaction was immediate and powerful. The audience responded to the song with an energy that surprised even the band members. The crowd went absolutely crazy, Dave Grohl remembered. We'd never seen anything like it. People were losing their minds to this song. We knew we had something special, but we had no idea how special it would become. As Nirvana continued to perform the song at clubs throughout the Pacific Northwest, word began to spread about this explosive new anthem that seemed to perfectly capture the mood of young people in the early 1990s. Everyone was talking about that song, recalled music journalist Everett True, who covered the Seattle scene. It had this incredible energy that made people feel like they were part of something important. You could feel that it was going to be huge. The song's power lay in its apparent universality. The abstract lyrics and explosive energy allowed listeners to project their own feelings of rebellion and alienation onto the music. Ironically, this universality came from Kurt's complete misunderstanding of Kathleen's original message. "The beauty of Smells Like Teen Spirit is that it means whatever you want it to mean," observed music critic Grail Marcus. Kurt's confusion about the title actually made the song more powerful, because it allowed everyone to find their own meaning in it. When Nirvana entered the studio to record Nevermind in early 1991, Smells Like Teen Spirit was chosen as the album's opening track and lead single. Producer Butch Vig recognized immediately that the song had the potential to reach beyond the underground music scene. That song had something that transcended genre and scene, Vig explained. It was punk rock, but it was also anthemic in a way that could reach mainstream audiences. It was the perfect bridge between underground and mainstream. The music video for Smells Like Teen Spirit, featuring a chaotic high school gymnasium setting, became one of MTV's most played videos and helped launch the song into the mainstream consciousness. The video captured the same energy as the song, noted video director Samuel Bayer. It was this explosion of teenage rebellion and chaos that felt authentic in a way that most music videos didn't. As the song climbed the charts and Nirvana became international superstars, Kurt began to feel increasingly ambivalent about his greatest success. The very popularity that the song achieved seemed to contradict the anti-establishment message she thought he was expressing. Kurt started to resent Teen Spirit pretty quickly, observed Chris Novoselic. He felt like it had been co-opted by the mainstream and lost its original meaning. He worried that he had become exactly the kind of rock star he had always criticized. The irony of the situation was compounded when Kurt finally learned the true meaning of Kathleen's graffiti message. The revelation came during a conversation with Toby Vale several months after the song had become a hit. "I finally told Kurt what Teen Spirit actually was," Toby recalled. "I explained that it was deodorant, and that Kathleen's message was basically saying he smelled like teenage girl deodorant." His face went completely white. Kurt was mortified to learn that his generation-defining anthem was essentially about feminine hygiene products. The profound punk rock statement he thought he had discovered was actually a silly inside joke about his personal hygiene. Kurt was so embarrassed. Chris remembered. Here he had written this song that millions of people were interpreting as this deep statement about youth rebellion, and it was really about deodorant. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The revelation made Kurt even more conflicted about the song's success. Not only had his anti-establishment anthem become a mainstream hit, but it was based on a complete misunderstanding of a joke about personal hygiene products. "I think Kurt felt like the universe was playing a cosmic joke on him," Dave Grohl reflected. "The song that made him famous was built on a misunderstanding about deodorant. It was absurd in a way that he couldn't have made up if he tried." Despite his embarrassment and ambivalence, Kurt continued to perform "Smells Like Teen Spirit" throughout Nirvana's career, though he often expressed frustration with the audience's demand for the song at concerts. Kurt would sometimes refuse to play it, recalled sound engineer Craig Montgomery. He would tell crowds that he was tired of it, that they should be more interested in the new songs, but the audience always wanted to hear "Teen Spirit." The song's cultural impact extended far beyond its commercial success. "Smells Like Teen Spirit" became a generational anthem that defined the early 1990s and launched the grunge movement into mainstream consciousness. "That song changed everything," observed music historian Bob Mayer. "It opened the door for alternative rock to dominate popular music throughout the 90s. Every band that came after was influenced by what Nirvana achieved with that song." Kathleen Hanna, meanwhile, watched the song's success with a mixture of amusement and amazement. Her drunken graffiti message had accidentally launched one of the most important songs in rock history. "I never imagined that my silly joke would become this huge cultural phenomenon," Kathleen reflected years later. "It's surreal to think that something I wrote on a wall while drunk became the inspiration for such an important song." The story of "Smells Like Teen Spirit" demonstrates how cultural moments often arise from unexpected sources and misunderstandings. Kurt's misinterpretation of Kathleen's graffiti created something more powerful than either of them could have planned. The fact that the song was based on a misunderstanding actually makes it more interesting, observed cultural critic Jessica Hopper. It shows how art can transcend its original intent and meaning. Kurt created something universal out of something completely mundane. Today, more than 30 years after its release, "Smells Like Teen Spirit" remains one of the most recognizable and influential songs in rock history. Its impact can be heard in countless bands and songs that followed, and its cultural significance extends far beyond music. That song captured something about being young in America that no other song had captured before, noted sociologist Dina Weinstein. It became the soundtrack for a generation that felt alienated and misunderstood. The irony that this generational anthem was inspired by deodorant graffiti only adds to its legend. The story reminds us that sometimes the most profound cultural moments arise from the most absurd circumstances. "Smells Like Teen Spirit" stands as testament to the power of misunderstanding in art. Kurt Cobain's complete misinterpretation of Kathleen Hanna's graffiti message created something far more meaningful than either the original joke or any intentionally crafted anthem could have achieved. For Kurt, the song remained a source of both pride and embarrassment till his death. He had created a generational anthem by accident, based on a misunderstanding about feminine hygiene products, and watched it become bigger than an he had ever intended to create. The story of how 4 words of drunken graffiti became the most important rock song of the 1990s proves that inspiration can come from the most unexpected sources, and that sometimes our greatest achievements arise from our most fundamental misunderstandings. If this incredible story of accidental inspiration moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that thumbs up button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear how the greatest art often comes from the most unexpected sources. Have you ever created something meaningful based on a misunderstanding? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to ring that notification bell for more amazing stories about the surprising origins of music's most iconic moments.